Good morning, friends. Welcome to another lesson with me today. We're going to start getting into the elements of stories. And the story element that we're going to look at today is called setting. Setting is where and when the story happens. And I wrote some examples up here, and I'll pull my camera a little bit closer so you can see this really well. Right now it's 2020. And so that is the when our story is happening. It can happen on a hot day. Could happen at night. Could happen during the daytime. It could happen in the olden days. But it also happens where? Where would be on a farm, at your home, in the city, on the playground. And it also can be a kind of time, like in the dark or a hot day or a cold day or a snow day or any of those kinds of things. So environmental things that happen too. The story I chose today is called Going West. It was written by Laura Ingalls Wilder. When I was a kid, and your parents may have talked about this too, when I was a kid there was a show on TV called The Little House on the Prairie. And The Little House on the Prairie was the story of a family that lived in the pioneer times. And pioneer times were the times back before the 1900s had even started, so well over 100 years ago from now. So it was in like the 1870s. Really long time ago. And a lot of those people, 1860, I think it was the 1850s to the 1870s, a lot of people who were living on the East Coast felt like crowded and like they wanted to move west where there was wide open spaces. And so this is the story, and it's written by Laura Ingalls Wilder, and they're kind of true stories. They're a little bit edited to add some details that aren't true, but there's chapter books, and these are books that are based on those chapter books. They just took the prime elements of the story and boiled it down to the essentials. But I'm going to read a little bit from the back so you can understand a little bit about where and when the story takes place. At the end of this story, we're going to go back through and we're going to figure out the setting of this story. The Little House books tell the story of a little pioneer girl and her family as they traveled by covered wagon across the Midwest. Laura Ingalls Wilder's classic books, illustrated with Garth Williams' timeless artwork, have been cherished by millions of readers ever since they were published over 60 years ago. So these stories came out in the 1960s, right before Laura passed away, and then her daughter took over and she edited them. But this one is specifically about going west. So when you look at this right here, this is called a covered wagon. It's also called a prairie schooner. And you'll notice that they have horses. This is before the time of cars, friends. And so these people would pack all their belongings into this wagon, and the children would sit back there, and the ma and the pa would sit front, and the horses or oxen would pull that wagon all the way across the whole United States sometimes. And it would take months and months, and sometimes even a year or more, to get all the way across the United States. They went so slow that some people wouldn't ride in the wagon. They would walk next to the wagon. So can you imagine doing that? Walking all the way across the United States? These people started in Wisconsin. So that is right by the Great Lakes. And so it's a little bit west of New York. It's called Going West. And this is the farm that Laura and her family lived on. Once upon a time, a little girl named Laura lived in the big woods. And remember, we're listening for the setting of the story. And so be thinking about the setting. So I just gave you a big hint. Who lived in the big woods of Wisconsin. Ooh. In a little house made of logs. Laura lived in the little house with her pa, her ma, her big sister Mary, her baby sister Carrie, and their good old bulldog Jack. And you'll notice the way that they're dressed is even in more old-fashioned clothes. Many people had come to live in the big woods. Almost every day, Laura and Mary stopped their playing to look up in surprise at a wagon slowly creaking by. So that was a surprise because there weren't very many people that lived in the big woods. And so that was heavy traffic back in those days, to be able to see a whole wagon going by. Wild animals would not stay in a place where there were so many people. Pa did not want to stay either. He liked places where wild animals could live without being afraid. He liked to see the deer looking at him from the shadowy woods and the fat, lazy bears eating berries in the wild berry patches. So they had stores back then, but nothing like what we have now. So they had to hunt bears and hunt animals in order to eat. And the animals had to have enough to eat so that the family could have enough to eat. And so if there were lots of people, the animals would go away, and then the family wouldn't have enough to eat. One long winter evening, Pa told Ma that he was going to take the family to live in the West. In the West, there were not as many people there. There were no trees, and the grass grew thick and high. So Pa sold the little house in the big woods. He sold the cow and the calf too. I want you to look at this picture here, and I want you to think about what is the time of year. So that's part of the when the story is happening for the setting. Pa made hickory bows, or hickory bows. Hickory is a type of wood from trees, and fastened them to the wagon. Ma helped him stretch white canvas over the boughs to make a covered wagon for the family to travel in. Then they packed everything up in the little house except for the beds and the tables and chairs. They did not need to take these because Pa could always make a new one. They didn't buy furniture either. They went ahead and just made it from what they found on the land. Then one morning, before it was even light outside, Ma gently shook Mary and Laura until they woke up. Laura and Mary put on their long red flannel underwear, their wool petticoats and wool dresses, and their long wool stockings. That's a lot of layers. Next, they put on their coats, their rabbit skin hoods, and their red yarn mittens. So if they're putting all those clothes on, what do you think the weather is like? Because that's part of the setting too. Outside the little house, there was snow on the ground, and the air was still and cold and dark. Through the gray woods came lanterns with wagons and horses bringing Grandma and Grandpa and aunts and uncles and cousins. When you traveled so slow like that, it was hard to see people once you left, and so they were leaving everybody behind. Mary and Laura held on tightly to their dolls and did not say a word. Grandma and the aunts hugged them and kissed them and hugged them, saying goodbye, because they might not see those people ever again in their whole lives, because they're so far away. The uncles helped Pa hitch the horses to the wagon. All the cousins were told to kiss Laura and Mary, so they did. Then Pa picked up Mary and Laura and set them in the wagon. He helped Ma climb up onto the wagon seat, and Grandma reached up and gave her baby Carrie. Off went the wagon, and the little house in the big woods stayed inside the log fence, behind the big trees that Mary and Laura liked to play under. And that was the last they saw of the little house. The family had a long journey ahead of them, but Pa was on the wagon seat and Jack was under the wagon, and Laura felt happy knowing they were on their way to another little house, a little house on the western prairie. And there's the family as they're going west. So, now we're going to look at this story again with those eyes, because we were paying attention to the setting. And at the beginning, you probably notice what time of year it is. And you probably notice that it is not snowy. It's not winter time. The trees are full of green leaves. I think that this is summertime. And so at the beginning of the story, we can write that they happened in summer. The other thing that we notice is this doesn't happen today, is it? This isn't happening during 2020. This is happening a long, long time ago. And so I'm going to write, It's happening during the olden days. Whoops. We don't always have to know the year it is, as long as we can kind of use a term that people understand. Back in the olden days. Look here. Summertime in the olden days. Where is it happening at? In the big woods. At their house. And so I'm going to also write the big woods. It's happening at home. In the big woods. But the story changes a little bit, doesn't it, friends? Excuse me, I have hair in my mouth. When we look at the ground here, it changed, didn't it? So the setting can change in a story too. So all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, in the story, time has passed, hasn't it? And now it is winter time. Everything else is still the same. It's still